Hello, book people. P.T. Hilton here. I want to talk to you today about nonfiction books about comics. So this is kind of a weird topic, but I was thinking about the other day. Man, I've read some really good nonfiction books about comics, and it's a weird kind of little subgenre. But I wanted to make a few recommendations. If you're someone who likes comics, or maybe wants to get into comics and wants to know a little bit about history and just wants to read more about comic books, here's some cool recommendations that you might like. The first one, and the one that I recommend everyone read, Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. Now, I will say this one has a very unappealing title, right? It doesn't sound that exciting. Like Understanding Comics. I already understand comics. I read comics. What do you got for me, Scott McCloud? What's the big deal? This book is awesome. I've seen it on so many like best comics of all time lists, and I finally had to check it out for myself. And it was well worth it. Scott McCloud is the writer and artist of the recent graphic novels The Sculptor. He's also did Zot for a long time, which is I haven't read, but it's supposed to be good. This book is basically, he takes it all the way from the very beginning of what makes a comic, what is sequential art, and he tries to like put a definition to it. But then he goes through and he really describes what is so powerful about the medium of comics and why it can affect us in a different way than the written word, and the way our eyes interpret things. Just a wonderful book. It's told in comic book form. It's a black and white comic. Similar, if you read The Sculptor, you know his style. This is black and white, though, instead of like kind of the blue scale that The Sculptor was. But really, I can't recommend this book highly enough. I know it's like, it doesn't sound that exciting, Understanding Comics, but like my brain was just like, whoa. It was just like on fire when I was reading this. Like so much, so thoughtful, so interesting about comic books. Comics or graphic novels or whatever aren't a genre, they're a medium. The visual language of that medium, the language of that medium is different from the language of any other really medium. And this book really talks about what that language is and why it works, and how different comics work. So again, can't recommend it highly enough, Understanding Comics. The next one I want to recommend is Marvel Comics, The Untold Story by Sean Howe. This is a really interesting book. It's thick, it's really in-depth, and it's kind of a comprehensive history of Marvel Comics. And all the way going from World War II and how it started, the kind of shady way that it started, that whole story, all the way through like Stan Lee and a lot of the artists, and going all the way up through the modern era pretty much. Really a fascinating book. Like, it might not sound like something that's super interesting, just a history about a comic book company, but oh man, just the struggles. And really one of the key things in the story is how a lot of the artists throughout the history of Marvel Comics haven't gotten the credit or the financial reward that they deserve for the amazing creations that they made. That were, we've got Avengers coming out like in a couple weeks. It's some of the artists who created those characters maybe weren't always treated the way they should be. But really just a fascinating, if you're interested in the history of comics, it goes into even the history of up to the era where Image Comics was started, so you can learn a little bit about the history of Image as well, because that was started by a group of former Marvel artists, for the most part, who left to start their own company. So just really fascinating, though, book on the history of comics and even beyond comics. It's just an interesting book about an industry like booming, and what happens when an industry suddenly takes off, who benefits, who doesn't. A lot of interesting questions. Very well researched book by Sean Howe. Finally, I want to recommend not a book, but a publisher, and that is Tomorrow's Press, TWO Morrow's Press. This is a company that does basically just nonfiction books about comics. It's kind of weird to recommend the company, but the reason that I'm doing it is because their books tend to kind of go out of print. So I'm going to talk about two books that are actually out of print from this company. And I know it's kind of weird, like, why are you recommending a book that's out of print, PT? Well, I'm not so much recommending these books as giving you examples of the stuff this company does, so you can kind of keep an eye out in the future for what's coming down the line from them. They do a lot of artist spotlights, like a whole book about one particular creator, which I'm not too interested in those. I would have to really like a creator a lot to want a whole book about them. But they also do some wider scoped books. Like one of the ones that I found that they have in print right now is Going Ape, which is a history of apes and monkeys and gorillas and stuff in comic books, which is kind of funny, a funny topic for an entire book, right? But a couple of my favorites that are out of print, and again, I'm just using these as examples of the cool stuff they do, is The Dark Age, which is about kind of the 80s and 90s, which was a time in comic book history where there was a lot of dark, like everything had to be dark. All the superheroes were getting edgier and darker and all that stuff. And then it was also the big speculator boom where people were buying, multiple copies of comic books, hoping they were going to be worth a lot of money someday. Publishers were printing books that were being prepackaged in like a sealed bag, and you'd have to decide, do I open the bag and ruin the value and actually read it, or just keep it in this bag as an investment? So a lot of weird stuff. That was an interesting book about that time. And then there's also Image Comics, The Road to Independence, which is about the history of Image Comics. So again, those are two books that are currently out of print that you can't get, but I just wanted to point them out as examples of the cool stuff that this company puts out. Tomorrow's Press. I'm going to try and keep an eye on that, and next time I see they've got a cool book like that coming out, I'll try to call it out on this channel. So those are my picks. The ones, obviously, that are in print that you'd want to get, that I'd highly recommend getting right away, are Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud and Marvel Comics: The Untold Story by Sean Howe. And we'll keep an eye on Tomorrow's Press for the future. How about you? Is there any nonfiction books about comics that you would like to throw in there? If so, put them in the comments below. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.